we'll talk first about the rumors, right? And you guys probably, I mean, you get rumors every week about driver movement, and this guy's not happy, and they talk to this person, whatever. Oscar Piastri, Red Bull. There are rumors that Red Bull see him as, the guy. If Max leaves, that's our guy. And we saw even on Drive to Survive, Christian was open about it. He's like, listen, if it was Lando or Norris or Oscar Piastri, I'd take Piastri. So how much is there to those rumors? Is it a serious thing? Is there a world where Oscar comes in and races against Max, or is it just if Max leaves, Oscar comes in? What can you guys tell us about those rumors?
Well, first of all, I think we get this every year.
Yes.
And there's always the same merry-go-round, and we all chase our own tails. Secondly, I think Red Bull spooked. Because, like I said earlier, losing Max is existential to this team. You need to replace him if he leaves the sport or leaves the team. You need to replace him with someone of equal or close to equal caliber. There aren't a lot of options in that. Verstappen, I don't think he sees the Red Bull team completely as the same team that he won all the championships with. An awful lot of people have left. And it feels over the next few races, over the next few months, like Red Bull have to prove themselves over and over again to Max for him to be willing to stay. But that is very fluid. You don't, and as I said, he reacts black and white, especially if he's frustrated. But I think Red Bull would be incredibly stupid if they don't have a valid plan B. Because you're so incredibly vulnerable. Of course we know Zak Brown would love to have Verstappen, because what would it do to his market value of every sponsorship spot on the car? If you have Norris and Verstappen there, it would fit him completely. It would fit him to say to Max, hey, I've got this beautiful orange hypercar. You could do this alongside your Formula One career. Be a McLaren guy. It fits with the marketing strategy that Zak Brown has. And Red Bull isn't stupid, so they will have to be looking for alternatives. And if you are looking for alternatives, there are, I think, a couple of options. One is Leclerc and one is Piastri. Both of them have frustrations in their own way. Leclerc maybe more so than Piastri, but it's not the first time that Piastri has been linked to Red Bull. But I would be very careful as seeing those rumors as something very tangible right now.
The really important thing to remember, I think, is that there's always stuff going on in the background. If you're a driver, it's your job or your manager's job to be speaking to other teams. If you're a team boss, it's your job to know what everyone's contractual situation is, to know if somebody's a bit unsettled. So if you're Zak Brown, you make sure that either through his manager or Max himself, you have a little conversation every now and again. You know where things are lined up. And little ideas will be chucked around. Oh, well, if this happened, maybe this. You may say to people, well, we think we'll know with Max by then. So just hang fire on doing anything if you're interested. So there's all these things. I think people tend to think that things magically get preordained and set way out and are just going to happen. But the reality is when it comes to driver moves and all these sorts of things, it's such a fluid thing. There's so many knock-on effects that for every move that happens, there are about 15 moves that were talked about and could have happened and in some way, shape or form almost happened, and weird pre-agreements are signed, and all of these things are going on in the background. So Red Bull will have contingency plans. I do think I'd be surprised to see Piastri going to Red Bull alongside Verstappen, because I don't think a driver who is in another top team will go into Red Bull alongside Verstappen. Lando Norris, who had been courted by Red Bull before, talked about this not necessarily being a good idea. And it's not fear, really. It's just pragmatism, isn't it? You're not going to do that, especially if you're in a team like McLaren. Okay, if you're Pierre Gasly or you're Carlos Sainz, it's a different equation because you're in a different part of the grid. But that's the thing to bear in mind. So I'm sure Red Bull have got the kind of nuclear option. What do we do if Max were to go? And I'm sure there have been little discussions in the background. Piastri is one of those they've been interested in. That'll have been something, but I don't think I know it'll never be as simple as the moment Max tells them there's some bit of paper or something, they just press the button and magically it's signed. So everybody's positioning themselves. That's the way to think of it. And when drivers say, oh no, we've had no conversations, Well, they always have, because it's their job. It's like when a technical director says, well, in testing, we're not really looking at other cars. It's like, well, it's your job. Of course you are. So if you press them on that, they'd have to sort of say, but it's all about positioning, playing the strategy, because if you as a driver, or most significantly your manager, is sitting on their hands not doing that, then they don't deserve their 10% or whatever it is. They are not doing the job for you, because the managers need to be ahead of the game. And that's why they are usually some of the most knowledgeable people in the paddock in terms of what's going on. And team bosses, they won't say it publicly, but the good ones, they know where everyone's at, and they will think, oh, this contract's at this, and not just the public things, but the details, what's the release clause, what's the sort of financial expectations, all of these sorts of things. So to basically echo what Nelson said, it's not preordained and set, but I think we know Red Bull's first choice is keep Verstappen, and I think if Verstappen's still there next year, which on balance he's more likely to be than not, I think their first choice is they continue with Isaac Hadjar, hope that Miami was just a bit of an aberration after a promising start, and you go on like that. Then if Max were to retire from Formula One or walk away, or less likely move to another team, I'm not convinced he's going to move. I don't think he'll move to another team, certainly not for 27. Then that's when you think, right, we've got these options: Leclerc, Norris, Russell, Piastri. These are all possibilities, and you will have a long list, because you want to have an option 5, 6, 7 on the list, just in case, because every now and again, even big teams get onto driver 7 on the list sometimes, and that's when you get the slightly unexpected moves.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about Piastri's management. You know, Tim and I have talked about this a little bit on the show, right, Tim, where, you know, obviously Mark Webber was a huge part of Oscar Piastri's entry into Formula One. And, you know, you saw him a couple times on Drive to Survive even, right? Like, and I know it's a marketing show, and I get it, but to have him featured there, I think, is a big deal. I have a particular fondness for Mark Webber because I loved the way he drove, and I also love his book very, very much. And I respect his point of view. Christian Horner called Mark Webber the biggest headache, pain in the ass he's ever worked with in motorsport, which I can also see. It's come out this year that Mark is not traveling to the tracks as much with Oscar. And I get the sense, and again, I'm not at the tracks. You guys are at the tracks. I get the sense that last year's championship bout between Lando and Oscar created some friction potentially between the team and maybe Mark. And I know that via Tim, there's been a slight change in how things are managed with the Piastri camp. So can you provide some clarity, and I don't care who takes the answer here, of who's managing Oscar Piastri now? Why is Mark not at the race? Is he just not as involved?
I think he's still as involved. I think they're trying to make it so that the management isn't the story. I think at the end of last year, quite often, Mark Webber became part of the story. He became quotable, and that got away a little bit from them. But Ed, how do you view that situation?
Yeah, I think Mark is an incredible character. What he achieved in motorsport is fantastic. He should never have got to Formula One, and I mean that in terms of the resources he had behind him. It's a miracle he even got those, whatever it was, a 3 or 4 race deal with Minardi. If he'd done that, that would have been an overachievement. So to do what he did was incredible. But he's always had that kind of fighting spirit, that underdog spirit as well. And I think that serves you well in a lot of situations, but it does also sometimes create a need to find an enemy to fight, if you like, even when there isn't one there. I think there were times at Red Bull when we saw both versions of that, when he was legitimately feeling Vettel was being favoured, but there were also times where I think he was sort of fighting a little bit with shadows as well. So like all of us, everyone has positives and negatives in their approach, don't they? So I think Webber was sort of playing that role a bit with Piastri last year, which was necessary at times, but it certainly created a little bit of friction as well. But also Piastri's more experienced. He's gone through a title fight as well. And Webber has got other things to do in his life as well. He's invested a lot of time in Piastri. So I think it may have been, I doubt it's quite as explicit. I don't know the exact story of how it played out. I doubt it's quite as explicit as they just banned Mark Webber from being there. I don't think McLaren, because he was causing problems. It won't have been that. But there'll probably been a realisation on both sides that there's a chance to kind of evolve how things work. And Piastri's got that experience. He's always got Webber there if he feels he needs a corner to be fought. But Piastri will fight his corner, ultimately. So I think that was just a natural evolution.
I do believe they are, in the way they operate, completely different, though, Piastri and Webber. You couldn't find, in terms of demeanour, two people who are more different than those two. And yeah, as Ed says, as Piastri has grown up, so too the needs change. What he needs from his support group on track, and it's very interesting to see what happens with Verstappen, because he has kept everything the same for the last 10, 12 years. It's always the same people. There's an incredible level of trust, and we can look at something like that as a way to do it. If Verstappen needs to fight a battle, he will fight it himself, or Jos will fight it, and then you have the calming influence, at least on the outside. We don't know how behind the scenes from his management. So, but every management situation is different, and I think, as Ed said, they've tried to evolve.
I think it's important.
Okay.
Sorry, just one.
No, go ahead, please.
I recall doing an interview with Piastri a few years ago, and talking about kind of his character, his personality, and that kind of ice coolness and where that comes from. And I remember him saying words to the effect of, "Oh, if anything, sometimes I need a bit of a kick, otherwise I get a bit too laid back." And I think there may have been an element of Webber being very good at doing that, because Webber knows how hard you have to fight as a driver to make it. And I'm sure there will have been times where he's kind of said, "Come on, Oscar, right. You need your kick, whether it's to get you going or do this, do that, do the other." But I think because he'd been through last year in particular, emerged as a multiple Grand Prix winner, you don't necessarily need that anymore. And so, again, it fits into that evolution side of things that Piastri knows probably when he needs to switch on, switch off, what he needs to worry about, not worry about. And he's got older as well. So he may think, well, obviously I still need management. They all need managers, but he can do it his way. And so probably Piastri will have thought, well, this is best for me as well. And there's no doubt Webber's been hugely influential in Piastri's career and is still a very important presence. So it's not a negative, but yeah, sometimes these things change. And Piastri could have won the Japanese Grand Prix, couldn't he? So he's picked himself up from the disappointment last year. He's still regarded as a top driver, and he is still a driver who is of interest to a team like Red Bull if they lose Max Verstappen, which tells you just because Piastri lost last year's championship doesn't mean that his career is over. I think people almost acted as if because he lost that, he was going, everything galvanises behind Lando Norris forever at McLaren. He's never going to get a chance again. Well, he might not get another chance at a World Championship because they're rare, but he is still on the trajectory to keep doing so. And who knows, McLaren may even put him in that position this year if they can catch up.
You make your own chances.
Mark's kind of like Mark was kind of like the attack dog too, right? Like Mark was there for certain specific conversations that needed to happen that maybe Oscar couldn't fight or knew how to fight on his own. But I think now when we move into this year, and the guys have talked a lot about that evolution and evolving, and as a driver for Oscar, moving Mark to maybe doing more of contractual stuff for him, looking after some of the commercial side of what Oscar has to deal with, and he'll have his performance side, he'll have his coaching side if he needs that as well, and just trying to, I think for Oscar, have his own structures where he needs them, and as his brand starts to grow as well, he's had to take on a few new people to help in certain aspects and certain directions, which is, like the guy said, that is a natural evolution for him as well. And I think it's good for him to evolve personally, to know when he needs to fight for something, pick and choose his battles where they need to be. I do find that Oscar is a little more, speaking with him a lot more lately. I do find that he's, what's the word I'm looking for?
Assertive.
Essentially, assertive is a great word. Yeah, a lot more assertive now, which I think for him is exactly what he needed to learn and needed to do. And it's interesting to watch what Max does with his specific circle, because I think that's what works for him, right? Like that, Max knows what the secret sauce is for himself to go out, perform, and have certain people in certain areas to take things away that he doesn't need to care about, worry about, or fight about. So I think for Max and the way he does things, it's interesting as well compared to like the way Lewis does things, right? Lewis has different ways of handling his own business. He has different people behind the scenes doing different things that we may not even know about. Lewis is really good like that. And so every driver has their own way of navigating through Formula One and taking pressure or things off their plate that they just don't need to have to worry about. And they need to find specific people who they can trust, who they can surround themselves with, who are going to make sure that they're going to be able to evolve their career. Because I've seen and I've been around some drivers who have had poor management structures and certain people in certain places. And usually when stuff like that happens, their career goes with it.
Right. Right. Now, with the remaining few minutes that we have left, because you guys have been so generous with your time today, we very much appreciate it. I want to quickly touch on Williams. To say this season has been a disappointment would be an understatement. And, everything for the last couple of years has pointed to this season being the season that they're fifth or potentially fourth fastest, and they're just not there. James Vowles has always been a very process-oriented person. So he was on, he was talking about, I guess recently, a plan. And he said, what I know is the pipeline of work that we have all the way to and slightly beyond the August break, that at the end of that should put us in a comfortable position where we're consistently scoring points every weekend from then onwards. Until that point, I think we should be able to get closer and closer to a perfect weekend, achieving a point score, but not necessarily being the fifth fastest team. For now, Alpine have that, and we got a few tenths to find. Is that going to be possible this season for Williams? And is James Vowles under a lot of pressure from ownership to get that done?
Ed.
Yeah, it's certainly...
Ed?
It's certainly possible that they can do that. The car's still overweight. It's going to take pretty much all season to get it down to the weight limit. So, weight is just performance, isn't it? You take 10 kilos out of the car, you gain 10 kilos worth of lap time, and there's some other fringe benefits too. But it's quite resource intensive to do that, which is why they're trying to balance up doing the lightweighting program with the upgrades, etc. They had a load of upgrades in Miami that worked, but they should have been on the car in Melbourne. So from these problems they had at the start of the season, with problems with crash tests and weight and all this kind of thing, those have knock-on effects that you carry for a long time. And what James Vowles has done there is very much modify their objectives. He said not long before the season that the fifth they got last year was the new baseline, the being best of the midfielders. And now they're talking about, August onwards, second half of the year, we can be consistent point scorers. Well, that's a very, very different and more kind of impoverished vision of what's possible. But it is a realistic one. They were 9th and 10th in the Miami Grand Prix, but they were helped a little bit there. The Williams was basically, there were sort of 4 teams in a group, all of which could have been about the 6th quickest team around there. And they were in that clump with Racing Bulls and Audi and Haas. So that's a bit better than where they were. There's pressure on Vowles, yes. He's still got credit in the bank, I think. But the problem here is there were key areas he's worked on improving, and the management of all the parts and the way the factory's working and bringing it into the 21st century in terms of monitoring and plotting everything, and ERP system, enterprise resource systems. I've forgotten the exact acronym. Shouldn't do that. F1, they love acronyms, but yeah. So tracking everything, so it's not all just in an Excel spreadsheet, if you like. And there seems to have been some breakdowns in that, so things aren't being made on schedule. So they lost track of a lot of those sorts of things, and that's a problem. But the key question is, why did it happen? Was it just crashing into kind of a necessary weakness that they hadn't anticipated, which isn't good, but that's okay because that's what the process of improvement is about. But it does have similarities to the problems they had in 24. There's a few things in common there. So you start to think, well, okay, is this a repeat problem that you thought you'd solve? Because that's a different thing. And so if you're, say, Carlos Sainz and looking at this, you'll be thinking, okay, I need to understand exactly why this has happened. Is it just a bump in the road? Because it's never linear progress, is it, in sport? Not everyone can achieve their objectives in any given season. But over a longer period of time, they can. So I think there is pressure. There's still support for him there. He's still in credit with the ownership. But let's say if we get to this point next year and there's been a similar thing, or something that has a similar impact but is a big deal, and they're missing and all these sorts of things, then I think that's the point where you say, hang on, actually, is there substance behind what's actually going on here? Or have you kind of grabbed the low-hanging fruit, made good improvements in the short term? And the point that you always said was so important, they were talking about 26 as absolutely key, the focus. 24 and 25 didn't really matter, and they made good progress there. So you thought, great, well, you're making progress in results in the years that don't matter. So where are you going to be when it really matters? And the answer is, you're going to start basically nowhere. So that's a blow. But it's like it's like everything. Improve, learn, fix. If you can do that, they'll be fine. If they can't, then you ask questions about the decision making and why things aren't working.
Ed, there are, a lot of Williams fans are a lot older now because it's been a while since they've been great, right? For the long-suffering Williams fan. For the long-suffering Williams fan, would you tell them to have faith or would you tell them to be cautious?
I think have faith. I don't see why not.
Have faith.
It is difficult. It is really difficult.
Nelson's shaking his head.
It's really difficult. Well, we'll hear the contrary view in a moment, but you've always got to remember that you don't want to get into the situation of you get the kind of the soccer approach, the football manager, change the manager, change the manager, change the manager. It's address the underlying fundamentals. And I'm not saying 100%. I'm saying have faith, but I'm not saying, bet your house on it happening, if you see what I mean, because it's really, really difficult. But the real metrics, the gauges of the progress are not necessarily kind of week to week or year to year results. It's kind of over a slightly longer period. So that's why I say he's still got credit, but he has used up some of that credit. Let's put it that way. And that's kind of where I am. So definitely have faith, but slightly less faith than maybe you had 6 months ago. So you spent a bit of faith as well as credit, if that works. Now Nelson can demolish my argument.
Yeah,
no,
Nelson, what's the rebuttal here? I'm excited.
It's not so much a rebuttal because my lack of faith is not so much in Vowles. It's in what this organization can do given the lack of resources. Not so much money, but all of their technical resources. What Lawrence Stroll has done with Aston Martin, a major investment before the CapEx, the amount of money you could spend on all your wind tunnels, all your facilities came in. Williams doesn't have that. So they have a baked-in disadvantage. Don't forget, 2 years ago, Vowles was very, very vocal about the fact that they would like to invest in all of their infrastructure, but they can't. And part of what will hold Williams back longer term is that they cannot do what Aston Martin, what McLaren, what Red Bull have done over the last few years. And this is it. They're stuck with what they have a little bit. Yes, they have issues this year that came from process issues, but fundamentally there is a ceiling what this team can achieve. And my lack of faith is in the question, can they return to the top of this sport? That, I think, is a stretch with the infrastructure that they have.
There's maybe a timeline question here. I think because at one stage I think they were talking about 28 as being the point where they'll have everything in place. That was always optimistic because this is a super long lead time process. So I'm sitting here thinking, if Williams were, say, 5th best again this year and still a gap to the top 4, I say, that's job done. That's a good, successful year. Maybe they thought there was a bit further. Maybe they thought they didn't have as far to go. And I think there has been kind of a little bit of, it's a bit of a rude awakening messaging. I mean, Carlos Sainz, I think, talked about that maybe in Japan. I think he said, I think it's been a bit of a shock because it's revealed areas where we are behind. So maybe I'm sort of mapping it to the sort of timeline I had in mind, which might have been longer than the ownership and James Vowles and some of those in the team had in mind. So I'm kind of agreeing to an extent with Nelson there. So to come back to that have faith question, it's still going to be a long time before Williams can be winning championships because it was always going to be, because this is you are having to judge this development because of the limits on the spending and the cost caps and all these kind of things. It is years and years and years. We're looking into the 2030s here, really. This isn't win a championship in 2028, 2029. You've at least got to go into the next set of rules. And you're looking on, without getting too corporate about it, in 5-year plans. You're looking 5-year and beyond, really.
Okay.
I remember, I think it was 2024, and it was in Bahrain. We were sitting down with Pat Fry. It was during testing, and I remember Pat talking about using those Excel spreadsheets that Ed had mentioned and losing like a nut, like a bolt, and not being cataloged, and they couldn't find it or where it was, and so trying to get them off of the Excel spreadsheets into a new program. You have to wonder how much that process has affected where they are now in trying to get, the car crash tested properly, trying to get it out in January to Barcelona for the first test, which they completely missed, and then it just making the track for the first test in Bahrain. And so you have to wonder how much that has affected things long term, because you're now switching your entire factory, your facility, the way you work over to a new structure. And on top of all of that, CapEx, like the guys had mentioned, I've spoken with James about the CapEx a number of different times. The last time I spoke with him about it was in November last year, and he was saying that they are, it's plugging along. We're slowly moving towards new components getting into the factory. The problem is trying to get the old components out and bringing the new ones in and having them be compatible. And so I think you're in those two stories. That is sort of where I think Williams hasn't lost their way, but in a sense has slowed down the operation and has moved it from not having these new components for Australia to having new components coming into Miami like towards the end of April. And so I think that's where you're pulling out that lead time, and that's slowing down the process of getting the car to where it wants to be, because all these teams know where they're going to be going or where they're heading. They've plotted it out, right? Like they have certain performance markers as they move through the season. When are they going to bring new components? How are they going to do it? When are they going to do it? What's the timeline? So they've mapped all this stuff out. And for Williams, they are behind in that process. And I wonder if it's because of those two things that I had mentioned.
It is worth noting as well, they've got the title sponsorship from Atlassian, which is worth a lot of money. So that's a great title sponsor. But it's also a company that specializes in workflows and collaboration tools and all these kind of things and using AI. That should be a big strength. So one thing I would like to know is that relationship not yet had enough time to mature for all of that to work? In which case you can look at this now and say, well, this is great because they've got the partner that can solve it all. But if the problems have arisen from integrating with that partner and it doesn't have tools that are actually tuned for the world of F1, then that's a negative. So you can spin that one either way. I actually don't know what the answer is, but that will be where some of the solutions are. And obviously, when you're trying to do something as complicated as a Formula One car, where you are trying to track absolutely everything, and everything needs to be delivered on time, and some of that production of parts and things was a problem in terms of them missing that early test, as well as some of the other things. So it'd be interesting to know where that falls into it. And again, that's another one a few years down the line where you might be able to speak to them and say, well, actually, this is the fundamental problem we crashed into. Because the one thing that Vowles has not impressed me with, in fact, this year, that he has been impressive in previously, is really addressing problems and where they emanate from. He has been a lot less precise about it this year, quite vague, in fact, which means either he doesn't understand it, which I doubt, or there are reasons why he doesn't want to expose too much where these have come from, which is why I just start thinking about, well, maybe the Atlassian thing on the short term hasn't worked as hoped. But if it hasn't, that there could still be good potential in it, because these things are complicated and take time. Right. So there's a kind of technical partner aspect to this story that is yet to play out in the public sphere that I'd like to understand a bit more about. That's just one other piece of the puzzle.
Very quickly before everybody goes, we got Montreal next week. Very excited about it. What are we doing beforehand? Ed, Tim, Nelson, I know you guys all have very different weekends. Nelson, you're going to be at the racetrack, correct?
No, I'm in the studio.
You're in the studio?
Yes, I'm in ViaPlay headquarters, ensconced there all weekend for the 24 hours of the Nordschleife and Nürburgring.
And that would be with a notable F1 racer. Am I wrong on that?
Yes, there are a few. Winkelhock is there.
And some guy with a last name that starts with a V,
yeah,
but whatever.
No, but it's a great field. It's going to be a great race. We've got a really lovely group of commentators to rotate through for the 24-hour race. I'm really looking forward to going back to my bread and butter a little bit.
Ed, what about yourself?
Well, I've got the weekend is off, so obviously I'll be following the Nürburgring 24 hours, because why wouldn't you be? I've been watching qualifying, and the thing I'd really like to do is watch the Dutch coverage and just tally up how many times Nelson says Verstappen during it, because as far as I can tell, his commentary of these races is mostly saying the word Verstappen, then a few other noises, then it's Verstappen. It just goes like that.
Offense to this. I take offense to this. It's like when Tim only talks about Lance Stroll. See, you caught flack, Tim, for nothing.
That's right. Okay.
It's very sad, this.
Tim, what about
See,
you?
dysfunctional
what do you got
family.
going
We're
on?
back to dysfunctional family here.
That's right. Ed, welcome. Tim, what about you?
Well, we just finished moving into our new place, so gonna have to be doing a lot of moving things to storage. What are we keeping? What are we doing away with? So still be doing a lot of that.
That's fun. We love moving, don't we?
No, we don't. And I've got Indy 500 stuff on this weekend, so looking forward to watching a lot of that. And then obviously the 24 hours of the Nordschleife, which is, I'm going to be watching that for sure. I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to get it on YouTube here in Canada. So we should be able to, for those watching, listening, should be able to watch that here as well. So that's pretty much it.
One of our listeners is gonna just do a supercut of every time now. Every time Nelson says Verstappen, it's just gonna be a supercut of all 24 hours.
They are going to need such a big external hard drive, where 10 terabytes for those clips or more, probably something like that.
It's so sad, this. The problem is I can't even defend myself because you guys don't get ViaPlay. You don't have it, so it's fine. It's okay.
All right. Well, Edd Straw from TheRace, Nelson Valkenburg from ViaPlay, Tim Hauraney from SDPN and TSN. Thank you all for the show today. It was a real pleasure. That was a really in-depth look at the sport, and it felt nice because I felt like we got started and then everything stopped for a minute, and we got one race, and it's like two weeks in between. So it was just kind of nice to get it all out. Thank you guys for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, guys.